The Hogsty is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsty.com.
The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, a show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports, industrial, entertainment complex. Today's sort of a special episode. This is our debut on Armchair All-Americans. So if you're listening to us for the first time, hello and welcome. I am joined by my colleagues, Steve and Rich. And over the course of the last 29 episodes and almost over a year of broadcasting, we've really covered a lot of business-related topics on this show. They can intersect with legal battles, media ratings, international sports, national sports, and where sports and social issues intersect. And over that time, we've probably covered, I don't know, tens, if not hundreds of different topics from different angles. And so often these stories, they don't end when we talk about them, as important as we may think we are, but they do continue, and they often have some pretty sizable updates. So today we're going to do a rundown of some stories that we've covered in past episodes in more depth, and just kind of give you a little bit of an update, and talk about what the implications are, and what this means for the world of sports and business. But first, let's say some hellos. So, hello, gentlemen. Introduce yourselves.
I'm Steve Thomas. We've been doing this show in conjunction with the Hogsty, like you said, for a little over a year now. It's been great. I'm the attorney of the bunch, as those of you listen know. And so if I prattle on too much about the law, somebody please slap me, because I know that's boring for everybody. But very happy to do it, and glad to do it with you two guys.
And I'm Rich Rogers, glad to be with you guys today on this day of the royal wedding, and I am happy to be here. Great bunch of guys. I am the moral compass of the show, and it's great to be with you guys this morning.
Implying the rest of us need a moral recentering, And of course, we're recording this early on Saturday, and we talked about this before the show, but since we're up at dark 30, I think we all turned on the royal wedding for a few minutes, and I turned it on, and the very first thing I see is this American black man thundering away, about, biblical passages. And I thought, the Queen must be having about a heart attack, listen to this guy go on and on and on. But I thought that part was great.
And my name is Chris, and I don't know, I'm probably the resident degenerate of the group, if Rich is the moral compass.
That's probably fair.
A jersey I wear proudly. And for the record, while the royal wedding is on in my house, I have not watched 1 second of it.
I wouldn't have watched a second of it, except that preacher wrote me into it because he was captivating.
All right, so let's get after it. We're going to start with our first update, kind of a monumental one. We had talked about a few different times. We have talked about the implications of gambling, of sports betting on sports overall, and we had actually talked about this case that was winding its way to the Supreme Court. I believe it's New Jersey versus the U.S. government or something along those lines. And so we had talked about updates in that case probably about, I'd say, 6 or 8 months ago. And just this week, I believe on Monday, we got a Supreme Court ruling, which was important in and of itself as a piece of news, but its ramifications will probably be, kind of dealing with years to come. So, Steve, as our resident legal eagle, why don't you give us our court watcher update?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it because the legal mumbo jumbo of it isn't nearly as important as the effects. But so there's a federal law called PAPSA, which is which the federal law basically says that the states cannot have gambling. And part two, if the states do have gambling, legal gambling, then it's unlawful. And so the state of New Jersey, a couple states were grandfathered in. New Jersey was grandfathered in for a year, but couldn't get their act together fast enough to get gambling approved, which is hence the lawsuit now. And this goes back decades. And then Nevada. So the state of Nevada or the state of New Jersey eventually sued over this law to get the law declared unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court just this week released its opinion stating the law is unconstitutional, but not really for the reason you might expect. I think a lot of people thought it was unconstitutional simply because it was giving a couple states a preference over every other state. Well, what the court actually said was that the law violates what's called the anti-commandeering rule. And in simplified form, it basically means that the federal government can't just order a state to do something. You can't have the legislature or the Congress and the president sign a law that orders the state of Utah to do something, for example. And so this PAPSA law violates that because the way the law was worded says the states cannot have legalized gambling. And it's that part of it that caused the law to be unconstitutional. And then the second part of it, which is perhaps maybe even more important, is that the rest of the opinion said this statute can't be saved. A general convention in the law when you're talking about statutes is that if a part of a statute gets thrown out for constitutional reasons, the court will always and has a duty to try and save the rest of the statute. In this case, the court threw the entire statute out, meaning it was not severable. And that's what's caused gambling to be legal. And what is actually legal is now these states are allowed to pass laws that allow gambling in their states. So I don't want to go too much more in detail because, again, we're going to bore people with this. But that's, in essence, what the court said. Thoughts?
I find it interesting, and I was reading an article before the show in Forbes. And first of all, I found the Supreme Court, the whole institution itself, is, in my opinion, is probably the most fascinating institution and entity in the country for me. Because in the article said that, well, does this mean the Supreme Court agrees with gambling? No, the Supreme Court doesn't agree or have an opinion on gambling at all. It's about whether Congress has the rights to tell states what they can and what they can't do. And this is fascinating in many different ways because this has been this subject has come up multiple times throughout our history. But in this particular case, I think that this opens up the potential for floodgates for Vegas not to be Vegas and Delaware and other states not to be the only ones that are able to rake in cash from gambling. But it also the tricky thing is looking at whether Congress will then step in and try to regulate and pass laws.
They can't
because they can. And the Supreme Court.
Yeah, they can fix
and the Supreme Court can. And certainly the Supreme Court cannot. And there probably won't be any Supreme Court overreach into that. So I do find this fascinating that once again the Supreme Court has stepped in and said, you know what. The federal government, you can't regulate states' rights to make the decisions on their own.
Because they could, because if Congress wanted to, and I don't know if they will, but if Congress wanted to, they could pass a statute that says gambling that crosses state lines somehow, some way is illegal under federal law. And if they pass a statute that said that, it would be constitutional because Congress's regulation of gambling comes from their power to regulate interstate commerce. And so if you pass a law that says interstate gambling is illegal, meaning which may not capture, people appearing in your local gambling house, but it would definitely capture internet, betting across the internet because that bounces all over everything. And there's all sorts of law. There's a lot of cases about how far the Commerce Clause reach can go. And so in the opinion, actually, Justice Ginsburg in the dissent touched on this, as did Justice Thomas, and said, you could argue that the institution of gambling itself touches interstate commerce, even if an individual local gambling house doesn't. And so in that respect, Justice Ginsburg at least thought that Congress could still regulate the entire gambling industry if they just fix the statute. So, and the conservative wing tends to limit the power of Congress to regulate commerce, and so there'd be a big argument over it. But there's no doubt that Congress could pass a law at a bare minimum regulating interstate gambling across state lines at least. Chris.
Well, one, let me say that my dream of enjoying a legal and safe spliff and a parlay on a Sunday afternoon is one day closer. So personal celebration for myself. Anytime the morality nanny state gets a little slap on the hand, I am happy. And so from that standpoint, now it's super interesting. One, you also pass just the federal government, now the states will have to weigh in. So from state to state, they'll be figuring out this. So I think a lot of people make this giant assumption that this, everyone's going to be able to go, celebrate, opening day football with legal betting. That's not going to be the case, right? Like 50 states have to decide what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. We've already discussed some of the federal implications. So, interesting, but it's not like this just, the clouds brush away with one day. So we have a long way to go. I think the obvious drip of this has been coming for some time. First of all, the idea that Atlantic City and Las Vegas are the only places that you can legally gamble in America is sort of almost a 15 to 20 year myth, just considering so many states have already opened up gambling. Obviously, the Indian reservations in the Southeast, New York State, by voter decree, just opened a couple years ago, and you're starting to see the places actually open. 7 full table game licenses across the state.
Detroit has one.
Right. So the steady march towards these kinds of things. Also, if you look at these other kind of vice regulations starting to weaken over time, and also the potential revenue streams that these are starting to open up. So I don't find it that surprising. I think if you look at where society is and where we've seen things stepping, this did not surprise me at all.
I think the other big part of this is the effect it'll have on major American sports leagues, the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball and hockey. At bare minimum, I think they are expecting a greatly increased interest in the product, which will in turn mean increased revenues in the form of increased interest. People watching the product more because they now can gamble on it. But the real interesting part of this is that the NBA, at least in the form of Commissioner Silver, has offered up the idea that the NBA should be entitled to a cut of gambling revenues. He doesn't really have any sort of legal justification for it at all, and it makes no sense to me. But he's throwing that out there, basically saying, hey, if you guys are gambling on the NBA, we ought to get a cut of it. Now,
from the business standpoint, it may not be, he may be wrong, but he would be remiss if he not try, since he's the commissioner and his job is to gain as much revenue for the league as possible.
Yeah, and the players ought to be for it too, because any increased revenue that comes into the NBA goes into the pot of revenue that gets split to the players, and so those players would be in favor of it too. But for the life of me, I can't figure out what sort of real justification he has for it, other than just it's like, hey, I want it. And that's it. But what I like to get your guys' input on is the business implications of gambling to sports leagues. Forget about the whether or not they get a cut of the revenue. Just gambling alone ought to be more business for every league, I would think.
Well, I think anytime there's money to be made, and you have a new entity like that for some states, then yeah, it's only right that people would want in. You have to, and you make a good point in that. How will now these leagues cater to high-end gamblers, particularly if you look at the NCAA? That's going to be to me the big look for is, to your point, is how they will cater to or manage gambling on the NCAA and who gets a cut of that money.
and I'm not a person who is nearly as pro vice as Chris is. Chris is pro everything. Let's legalize everything and let the chips fall where they may. I kind of tend to come out on the opposite end of that, and my fear of legalizing gambling is, the big reason the NFL in particular, which is the most conservative and stodgy of all the leagues in the United States, at least, the concern has always been corruption in the league. And if the league is sort of sanctioning gambling, who's to say the games aren't fixed? And that's the problem, and that's always been the concern. And the NBA has had that problem before in the form of, I can't remember the ref's name. We had a referee.
Donaghy.
Yeah, thank you. There you go. Tim Donaghy. You're right. Tim Donaghy was fixing games. Now, he wasn't doing it. He was sort of doing it on his own, and he was a bad guy, as it turns out. But that's my fear, is that how do you protect the integrity of the game if the leagues are sanctioning gambling? That's my fear.
Well, couldn't you make the argument, and these are all theoreticals at this point, but can't you make the argument that the transparency and the spotlight on the legitimization of this industry helps to set those regulations? Because you're already acknowledging this stuff is happening. It's happening by design in the shadows. So I think you can make a case, but it'd be dubious to say that legalizing it makes it more rampant. I'd say it's already pretty rampant, and the shadows in which it hides are outside the law. This at least brings everything into regulation in the law. I'd actually make the case you could probably have a better chance of regulating those kinds of abuses with everything being above board than you currently do now.
I mean, it's already fixing a football game would already be illegal under federal and state law.
Right, but if you had registered betting houses and stuff, then you're tracking their business. There's regulations. People can always cheat, so let's not be an idiot. But if all of that is illegal, then you have no way to have a look in, oversight, understanding of what's going on.
Yeah,
think of a lobbyist. They have to register. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. A bookie wouldn't be that dissimilar to a lobbyist in this situation.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I mean, you have it. Okay, so you have legal lotteries, right? There's legal state-run, regulated lotteries, but I mean, think of how long you have illegal number running. So there's always going to be, you have the legal thing, and then you have the black market thing, for lack of a better term. So those things do exist even with regulations, laws, and things like that.
But not at scale, though. Not at scale.
Okay.
And would you rather buy a lottery ticket or go to your? Would you rather go to a lottery ticket or go to your shady numbers runner right now? Right, like the optimal experience to the consumer values makes them go to the lottery ticket.
Well, that's true because the pot is bigger.
They're not scared.
But yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying, Chris. I think your point is that, Tony Soprano is less likely to go break the legs of some poor, first rookie wide receiver if there's federal state oversight. I mean, that's your point, right?
Yeah.
My point.
Trey Quinn better be.
Yeah, really. Tony's going to come after him if Tony's alive, because I think that question's been outstanding now for a decade. But my fear is that. Does the public lose confidence in the integrity of the game if the commissioners of these leagues are sanctioning gambling? That's my fear.
Well, that's a great point, because I think that when you talk about the integrity of the game, you already have a lot of questions about the NBA already and the officiating in the NBA. The NFL, they question sort of just the competence of referees to get calls right, not necessarily that fixes and things are in. So you bring up, that's a great point. And, there's already a perception in the NBA and college in the basketball game, period. And maybe that's from some of the memories of the Donaghy and of days, days gone by where, where games have been fixed.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there's a crowd of people out there who are convinced that the NBA is fixed. They're convinced that Adam Silver and the commissioner's office rigged the draft and rigged the playoffs. I think that's a little silly, quite honestly, and a little Oliver Stone, conspiracy-ish. But there's a crowd of people that believe that seriously, and I don't think having officially sanctioned gambling, because who's to say the NFL and the NBA couldn't establish, much like they have the resale ticket market,
secondary market.
Yeah, who's to say the NFL couldn't establish a gambling house and say, bet through, here's the NFL's betting house,
But I've heard us say on this show, and we just say it unconsciously, but we say, well, the NFL doesn't want to see Jacksonville versus Oakland in the Super Bowl, or the NBA doesn't want to see Boston and Houston in the NBA Finals. Well, if we keep saying that, aren't we speaking it into existence that maybe they don't?
Well, I think from a ratings perspective,
and when I say maybe they don't, do I think that they would say, the whole, well, let's make sure Cleveland wins? No, but does the NBA want to see Boston and Houston? No. So, if it's close, wink, wink.
Well, like
if a call is close.
Well, yeah, it's like the NBA would not want to see Oklahoma City and the Milwaukee Bucks in the final, because that would be a ratings disaster. What they want to see is the Knicks, the Lakers, the Cleveland LeBrons, because they're not the Cavaliers. It's only one player. Yeah, that's what the NBA would want to see for a ratings perspective. And so, yeah, that's my fear, is that there's going to be more and more talk and less confidence in the leagues if there's also a financial aspect. If the leagues are also making money on gambling, I think it could possibly further erode the confidence the public has in these leagues, particularly, as you point out, the NBA. That's my fear.
The secondary market ticket sales is a really interesting analogous situation, because obviously scalping is a huge problem in professional sports. But since the stub hubs and secondary markets, and then the league's adoption and arrangements with those markets, scalping has essentially become legitimized, right? Yes, you go get a ticket, outside of a gate, sure, but not at all the kind of black market industry that it was even 10 years ago. So
that's also because of the advent of electronic tickets, also, not just because of
but that stuff those kind of technological advancements that have also improved gambling. So that sort of goes for everyone. But before we move on to our next subject, might be interesting to talk about, there's going to be tons of long tail implications of this that we're not even thinking about. We're thinking of some of the big ones. But I read an interesting one that might be, if we have any ideas of what some other ones might be, but the one I read about was that this may force the NFL into hiring their referees full time. Because they're part time now, and they may, as a way to protect against some of the stuff Steve is talking about, it might be time, let's just legitimize our referees as full-time officials.
Yeah, well, first of all, the other one we haven't mentioned is daily fantasy, because that's already basically sanctioned gambling in a sense, and there's already been a ton of legal issues with that. And so the NFL sanctioning of daily fantasy, I can't remember the names of I don't do them, but somebody
FanDuel and one other one.
But as to the referees, number one, they're already paid like full-time employees. If you guys don't know this, the senior referees are making like $300,000 a year just for refereeing alone. And even the junior referees are making six figures. So most of them have other jobs, but they don't really have to because they're making a lot of money anyway. I just wonder, if they hire full-time referees, what they're going to do every day. What's their job going to be? What is their what could they train 5 days a week?
Watch film.
But I mean, at some point, enough is enough, right?
I think it's about oversight, so that they actually have them. Like it's about their legal connection.
I understand your point. I mean, from an oversight perspective, sure. I mean, that would keep Tony Soprano away from the refs. I mean, I get it. I just wonder, does it really make business sense? Because you'd have to pay them more, to have them be full time, and I just don't know what they would do every day. At some point, there's enough training, because they're already pretty good refs, and so if you have them train 300 days a year, I mean, my goodness.
Like, does Buffalo Wild Wings become a place where you can order wings, watch 70 games, and lay a wager? That's what's interesting, like over months and years, to see some of the implications start to emerge.
Yeah. I mean, you look, it's like I won't say the word I was going to say, but it's like the guy in the corner of the liquor store playing Keno all day, looking up looking up at the screen. I mean, so that's what we could be coming to.
And that's my fear.
Someone betting on cricket.
And that's my fear. And that's the problem with Chris's. Let's legalize everything. At some point, the government has an obligation to protect society against itself. I know Chris doesn't agree, and that's fine. But at some point, the government has to protect the people against their own stupidity, which is the reason for these laws.
Nanny state.
I was also reading that this case has more far-reaching implications, not just for sports, but in general, in whether the federal government or the federal people can actually order states.
It's a hyper-technical legal argument because the federal government does it all the time, and they do it in the form of budget threats. They do it, like, for example, in roads, the government will say, okay, we're going to withhold federal highway money if you guys don't fix this road locally. That happens every month, every day.
Right.
And so that's the way that the federal government exerts pressure. What they can't do is say, we ordered the state of New Mexico to spend money and to fix this road.
It's interesting. That's a great point because in Washington D.C., which we know is a federal territory,
that's different.
They said it all the time. If you don't get crime under control, or you don't get this done, or you don't do that, then we're going to withhold.
DC's
our allocation.
DC's a little different, like you said, because it's not a state. Yeah, that's a whole nother set of issues.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a wording thing more than anything. And the statute would be very easy to fix if Congress saw fit to do it. And, I've not heard any. I've heard some rumors of a couple congressmen wanting to introduce bills. I don't know if, we're getting close to election time now, so I doubt we'll see that in the next 2 years.
They can't renew the farm subsidies. They're not gonna tackle this anytime soon.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of my thought.
All right, so moving on, that's the story that we have been following in various forms, not just this particular legal case, and as we see the implications of this, I'm sure it's good for It's Just Business, because it will up-level tons of good content. Always be looking for content. All right, so what is our next story on the docket?
Michigan State.
Ooh, all right, from levity to sobriety here.
A harsh change.
Yeah. So the other really big sports business story this week was the announcement of the settlement between Michigan State University and staggeringly 322 people or
something like that.
Women, specifically. Wow. So I believe it was a $500 million settlement.
$500 million settlement, $425 million to the current plaintiffs, which are the 320-something women, and then $75 million is set aside for future victims when they come forward. It's not the culmination of a story because USA Gymnastics is being sued. There's going to be another huge settlement there. Probably the U.S. Olympic Committee, I would assume, also is going to have to pony up. $500 million, even to a university like Michigan State, is a lot of money. And the interesting thing to me, I'm not as well versed in Michigan State law and the university law with regard to whether the university can go out to its alumni and get donations and raise the money, or whether that's barred by federal law or state law, because it might be. But that is a lot of money, even for a major university like Michigan State. It's not nearly enough. I advocated it here on this show, I think, and in writing on the Hogsty, that I thought the Michigan State athletic program should have been shut down completely because of this. And clearly that didn't happen and was never going to happen. But this is just really the beginning, people, because you're going to see another settlement from USA Gymnastics from this, and probably from the U.S. Olympic Committee also. But it's just a horrible story, awful story. And, make no mistake that the university is at fault. Yeah, Larry Nassar was a scumbag who abused people, but the university failed these women completely. They reported it to people, and they were ignored. The university turned a blind eye, laughed at them, covered it up. did everything wrong and failed to do anything to protect what was actually important, which was the health, welfare, and safety of their student athletes. It's shameful.
Well, looks like Kirk Cousins is going to have to give a huge donation from his big signing bonus.
Cough it up, Kirk.
I know, but I wonder if they shut these, and I totally agree. I think anybody that I meet that goes to Penn State, I'm sorry. I know I'm wrong, but
no, you're not wrong. I agree with you. I can't root for them at all anymore. Yeah.
But I think I wonder if the argument is, well, if we shut down the program, then we will not be able to generate the revenue to pay out the lawsuits.
You know what? Michigan State has a lot of money, and it's not just in the form of athletic revenue. That's a major university, major state university, and it's also a public university. And so I would argue that the state legislature needs to come up with the money somehow, some way. They need to appropriate the money, somehow from their budget if the university, if it's not already in the university's budget. It's not a private university.
I just cannot for the life of me understand why these programs have not been shut down.
Yeah.
I don't know what the NCAA's rationale is.
I know what the rationale is.
I don't know.
I do. You know it too.
Money?
Of course. It's revenue. That's the only thing that matters, okay?
That's just crazy.
I totally agree with you. It's crazy, but they're making a lot of money, and a lot of individuals are making a lot of money. And so, if a few women have to get abused, so be it. They'll pay you lip service to it, but at the end of the day, nothing is going to stop the monetary gravy train. Nothing.
So, let's be honest here. We talked about this story in depth, one, because when some of the news broke, but it was also right around lead into March Madness, if I remember correctly. And so we talked about it through the lens of Tom Izzo, Michigan State. He's the sports king of Michigan State. He had been implicated, plus also, the department's not that big, right? Ultimately, like 322 women, there's got to be a system of protection. We talked about it in the context of that, plus Penn State, these programs being shut down. Can we even enjoy March Madness? Blah, blah, blah. This is a ginormous win for Michigan State on a number of levels. Yes, it's a lot of money. They're going to have to figure out how to pay it out. But, one, no programs were shut down, and we don't see the NCAA coming to call on their golden tickets anytime soon. So, and Tom Izzo, the basketball program, all kept his job, weathered the storm. Two, they're the first, as Steve said, they're the first ones. They paid out. They came to a settlement. The story's going to move on to battles against USA Gymnastics or the U.S. Olympic Committee. So the battlefield for this story is going to move on. Michigan State paid up. They got out of the headlines. They got out of it early. This is a pretty big. I'm not saying I'm not happy about it. So don't misread me. But it's a big win for Michigan State.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And Baylor was the other program. And the other thing, that we talked about in conjunction with that, Niall, I see, you spoke so well, I completely lost my train of thought. I had some wonderful point to make. Oh, it was March Madness. It was the NCAA. This happened right before, 2 weeks before the March Madness tournament started. And at the time, we all wondered whether the NCAA was going to come and crack down on some of these schools and sit a bunch of schools, not let them play. And everybody, of course, knew that was never going to happen because, again, the monetary gravy train never stops. So what have we heard let's summarize what we've heard about the NCAA's investigation, okay? You ready? Here it is. Nothing. Zero. Haven't heard one word from the NCAA at all about any investigation into anything because they want to slow roll it. They want to keep it out of the headlines, as you said, as much as possible. And we'll hear 3 years from now, they'll have some conclusions and they'll find somebody or, there'll be some scholarship sanctions and then that'll be it and that'll go away. The last thing the NCAA wants to do is the right thing, which is actually fix the problem. They don't want that because it's going to cost them money.
Well, I don't know how I can't say what I would do if I was in their shoes, because there's really no money making cash cow for a gymnast post Olympics, or they're not going to make MLB money. So But I just wonder though, with something like that, and you all know I've been very candid about my history of sexual abuse, and whether the money would make it right with me. To me, I wonder if there's some things that are greater than money. That because let's just say I get $10 million. Okay, I've got $10 million. I'm set for life. But then it would be something inherently wrong for me to continue to sit and watch, just like at Penn State, maybe just like at Baylor, to watch the very next Saturday after I get my check, to watch these athletes or the school. Let me take the athletes out of it. Watch the presidents and the hoi polloi of the university sit and enjoy these games. That to me, I can't say it wouldn't be worth the money, but that would not sit well with me.
I think the reaction of the Penn State fans and alumni to the Penn State scandal is exactly what you're talking about. Because they're cheering the program on. It's disgusting to me. I've not been sexually abused, so I can't speak to how I would feel about that. But what I can say is that the only way the law can fix a problem is through money. Okay? I mean, that is the avenue that the law gives these women as compensation for what they went through. The only thing the law can do is give them money. And so that's the only real way that the court system can repay them, for lack of a better term, for what they went through.
No, let me just disagree there. Okay. I think, or just adjust. Let me just add. I think that the way, yes, money, but taking away your ability to make money would be a real punishment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the problem is, would you have a court issue a restraining order on Michigan State conducting athletics? I think that's. I mean,
there's probably illegal. There's probably some legal reason why you could.
Yeah, that's way above and beyond what a court could do in this circumstance. That would have to come from the university itself or the NCAA, one of the two. I don't think a court really has the authority under those circumstances to do that.
It shows you how much Michigan State didn't want to find out. Yeah. That they were willing to pony. I mean, this wasn't a court degree, right? This was not damages. This was a deal.
A settlement.
Yeah, it's a settlement. So
well, can you imagine the trial?
Right. So it was worth $500 million to Michigan State to get this done.
To keep it off the record.
Do you think? Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you. Do you think also some of this money, this settlement, would this come directly from Michigan State, but would some of it also come from the Big Ten?
Well, the lawsuit was against Michigan State University, and so the settlement is with Michigan State University and not the Big Ten, which is another separate legal entity. So no, just Michigan State.
They'll certainly use revenue that they get from being a member of the Big Ten.
Yeah, but the Big Ten doesn't. No, the Big Ten is not a part of it. No.
All right, so this will be a story that I'm also sure we will be checking back in, because as we said, this is not the only realm that this will play out in over the coming months and, honestly, the coming years. And we're about 2 years out from a Summer Olympics, I believe.
Oh, and yeah, by the way, if you divide 475 million by 322, it's a lot of money for each one, but that's not exactly lifetime security money.
Yeah.
Just say that much. That comes out to what, 1.3 million per person. That's not exactly setting them up for life, But go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, I was just saying with the Summer Olympics, around a couple corners, but coming in our front view, that will reignite this story for sure, given gymnastics' prominence in the Summer Olympics and the fact that this story will not have been gone away by that point, especially in the context of the U.S. Olympics Committee. All right, so what is our next topic?
We're going to do Eli Manning.
Eli. All right, so this is a kind of a silly story, but did come to a conclusion, but did have a lot of interesting implications around sports merchandise, about let's call it the gray market around sports memorabilia, and influence peddling and relationships between athletes and, less than above board people. I'm going to see if I can. I believe Eli Manning was being sued for some fraudulent signatures. Was that what it was?
It was game worn uniforms, specifically helmets and jerseys that may not have been game worn. That was what the issue was.
Right. So they were not. They were being fake. They were fakes.
The equipment manager was basically was faking up grass stains and cuts and whatnot on jerseys and saying that these are game worn. The implication was that Eli knew about it and consented to this arrangement. And so this was our very first story we ever did on this show, if I recall, as a matter of fact.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was story number 1 on episode number 1, I think. Anyway, and so Eli got sued. The equipment people got sued. Some of the middlemen got sued. What happened this past week is that Eli Manning, the whole case got settled. Eli has to pay some money. That the terms are undisclosed, but Eli was the one that had the most to lose, because if Eli is implicated in a fraud scheme, then he's going to be subject to discipline by the NFL under the personal conduct policy. And so, can you imagine Eli goes to trial and is found liable for fraud? Well, then he's going to get suspended. And, at the tail end of a borderline Hall of Fame career, and that's the last thing he wanted. And so he's going to pony up pretty quickly. This happened on the morning of trial. This happened during jury selection, right before jury selection. So I think Eli's had the most to lose, and that's why we saw a settlement, because it was always ever about money. Anyway, that was all it was. And so it's settled. Now Eli's off the hook, and he can proceed to go be a aging mediocre quarterback for an NFC East rival to the Redskins.
The only thing that I want is my $36 million back that they took from the Redskins. So I feel that would be just punishment for us to get our $36 million back. I know it wasn't, I don't know if it was a Giants thing, but $36 million back in cap space would be just fine as restitution for me.
The implication to that, and Rich is referring back to the Redskins cap penalty that was imposed for the Redskins dumping all of Albert Hainsworth's guarantee into 1 year during the uncapped year. And the rumor was that John Mara, who is the president
It's not a rumor, it's a fact.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a rumor. John Mara was leading the charge on penalizing the Redskins, and by the way, the Cowboys had a penalty along with that too. So, we are all Redskins fans on this show, and we all hate John Mara because of that. So, yeah, I think making John Mara cough up some money and give us some cap money back, that'd be a just penalty for defrauding the public over Eli uniforms.
Loathe is the most appropriate. LOOOATH.
With a couple extra O's in there.
Yes.
That is the time I've most been on Dan Schneider's side, was in that dispute, I have to say. It was ridiculous.
I've looked at it from a legal perspective I've spent more hours than you could think of, and I could not come up with a way in which the Redskins violated the collective bargaining agreement.
It was insane.
It was truly, we have no cap, but you violated the spirit and intent of the CBA by pretending there's no cap when there really was no cap. And so what it really was collusion. You want to talk about collusion? That was collusion, because all the owners got together and said, "Yeah, we're going to pretend as though there's a cap so we can keep our own costs down." And when the Redskins and the Cowboys don't do it, all of a sudden they're the bad guys. That is real collusion right there. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
It hamstrung the team for 10 years too, I would argue. The other point is, and this isn't a huge story, so we can move on soon. This is the second story that we've done an update on and talked about in today's episode, where I can literally write and picture the Sopranos scene in the background, right? The gambling story in New Jersey is obvious. There was actually threads of it on the actual Sopranos, but can't you just imagine some C squatter and Sopranos crew with a bunch of Dick's Sporting Goods jerseys out in the backyard, cutting and scraping them on the grass.
Absolutely. And then having some poor NFL player, over a barrel,
Yeah.
you're gonna help us with this, or we're gonna break your legs.
I just shared with you guys that I just got my Dave Butts autographed jersey in the mail, and they sent me this picture. I won't say the name of the company, but I got this jersey, and it showed a picture of Dave Butts actually signing it. And now that you guys are talking, I'm like, that doesn't look like Dave. Let me look at it really well. That looks like just some big white guy signing it. I don't know if that's
we all
Dave
look alike.
Butts.
We all look alike.
Yeah. So now you guys got me thinking.
Well, also, how do you know it was your jersey? There's a million Dave Butts jerseys out there.
I
It
know,
could have been
and I
some
don't
big
know,
white
man.
guy signing a Dave Butts jersey, and you just got the fraud.
Well, it never claimed to be. The thing is, though, it never claimed to be game worn. It's just a signed, authenticated Dave Butts jersey. So.
Yeah, and that's what we talked a lot about the last time we talked about this. And I think even a couple times. To what degree does all of this thing is just kind of shady or a scam? Maybe not even an illegal scam, but like new and improved Tide type of marketing scam. And how much do we want to care, right? Like we know when we do these things that that it's sort of fantasy, or we like believing, and so it's really interesting to what degree more of this stuff comes to light.
I've got a story about this.
We don't even want to engage.
Real quick. So at lunch once several years ago, I wandered into a memorabilia store, and there they had sitting on the shelf was a Barry Bonds signed baseball, and even though I'm a Dodgers fan, I've always kind of been a Barry Bonds fan because I think, he's the modern day Babe Ruth, basically, in terms of hitting. And so I went back from that and from lunch and then looked at Barry Bonds' website. And lo and behold, on the website, he had a photograph of the ball that had that very signature on it and said, "This is a fraud. If you see this, this is not my signature." And so I printed that screen out, and I took it back to that memorabilia guy the next day and said, "You're selling a fraudulent ball. Here it is." And he went, "No, I have a certificate of authenticity here." I said, "Well, Barry himself said this is a fraud." And so, if you guys out there think that those certificates of authenticity mean anything, they don't. It's just complete and utter crap. But go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not. Okay, I have some sports stuff on my wall. I'm not a big, this was Sammy Ball's cleat. Okay, I'm not that guy. But I do like I was at a Redskins game, and this is the first time I had ever seen this. And this guy had on a Sean Taylor University of Miami jersey. And I was like, why does this, from afar, I'm like, why does this guy have on like a green? But it took me a while to really get it. So, I'm all about uniqueness as opposed to authenticity. Like I said, I'll probably be, maybe if not, I might be the only guy at a Redskins game with a Dave Butts jersey on. So that's what I look for.
That's fair enough. It's fair enough, and it's the Eli Manning trial. We need to move on, but the Eli Manning trial sort of brings to light the shadiness of the entire sports memorabilia industry, because you don't really know if the cleats you bought were really Sammy Baugh's cleats. You're just taking somebody's word for it at the end of the day. You don't really know that, and that's what was proven here with the Eli Manning trial. And a settlement doesn't necessarily mean, the settlement will come with language that says basically we're not admitting liability, but and Eli had a lot to lose. But at the same time, I think it was pretty well established in the case that the items themselves were definitely faked.
We definitely have, well, I don't know if we know a number yet or not, but
No, we're probably never going to know the number.
Well, whatever the number is, it's whatever Eli Manning's lily white reputation was worth to him.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, so I think we're moving on to our final story, which is NASCAR. Am I right?
Yes.
All right, so this is not a big one, and we actually just talked about this last week, and we have gone on the record multiple times saying that none of us care that much about fast cars going around in a circle. But NASCAR is emerging as a pretty fascinating sports business topic. Not last week, but our last episode, we talked about their potentially switching their single sponsor model from their championship cup away from Monster to multiple. And this week, a really fascinating story popped up that said, is NASCAR actually preparing itself for a sale? And what would be the implications for a sports league of that size to be sold? And it's something that we don't really see very often because the big major sports have antitrust laws. The way that the systems and their infrastructures are set up, you really wouldn't and couldn't do that kind of sale. But NASCAR is its own entity, totally privately held, and thusly a bit of a black box. So it's actually, if you were going to business school and sports business school, it would be, this is a potentially fascinating case study about sports leagues in the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, they're the only major sport that has a single group of owners that own the whole product. That's the difference here. The NFL obviously is owned by 32 different owners. This is one family that owns this thing. I didn't realize until Chris sent us a story around about this week. I didn't realize that they also had an interest in some of these tracks, and that dramatically increases the value of NASCAR dramatically if they're going to sell it. NASCAR has lost some of their audience in recent years, I think, as has a lot of sports, and that's part of the concern here, about it. I think it is fascinating, though, because they have this, they're a privately held company, but they're a major multi-billion-dollar business. It's interesting. I'm very curious to see if they sign and if they sell. If they sell, what price is it, and does it include the tracks? Because when you're talking real estate, that's a whole nother level, because real estate is a hard asset, particularly tracks, and that's very, very, very valuable. And that's not, the value of the real estate isn't going to decrease like the value of, say, a sports league could. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see a whole sports league get sold. Because I think even something in those sort of, I don't know, second-tier sports leagues, like something like MSL would be more similar to the NFL.
MLS?
Yeah, MLS, yeah, sorry. Would be more similar to NBA or NHL or MLB than it would be NASCAR. So even other kind of mid-tier sports leagues won't be the same as NASCAR here.
The other one is the two new football leagues that are popping up are both privately held. And we talked about this on a show. One league is Dick Ebersol's son is involved in, and then the Vince McMahon League, which is a name I can't remember. But both of those are going to be privately held leagues in which the ownership of the league owns all the teams. So that's more like NASCAR. It'd be those two minor B league football leagues.
So emerging sports league business models is kind of a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
To watch. So one thing we sometimes do on this show for our new audience members is end with a little kick it around the horn, stories that we're interested or watching that we might be talking about in upcoming episodes. So we'll quickly, as our exit strategy, kick it around. Rich, you want to start?
I'm watching what's going on with the Redskins front office realignment, and whether this spells the end at some point for Teflon Bruce Allen. And they say he'll stick around. He's doing the stadium deal, and I'm watching whether it will be the Washington Redskins or the Richmond Redskins. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on.
The big thing that's on my mind, sports business wise, is the success or failure of professional sports teams in Las Vegas. Because that kind of melds into the gambling story. And Las Vegas has historically been a pariah for sports leagues for the credibility reasons we discussed. The Vegas Golden Knights, which is the hockey team, is actually, I think, just made the Stanley Cup Finals.
They're 1 game away.
1 game away. Okay, so 1 game away from the Stanley Cup Finals. And then we have the Raiders moving there in 2020. Well, are there going to be negative implications associated with that, or is it going to become sort of mainstream as gambling comes online more and more in the coming years. So I think that's one thing I'm keeping an eye on.
You stole mine. So I will stay in a similar vein.
We're talking off the top of our head here,
I know.
people.
But I actually think I'll take kind of a B storyline on that similar tip. So yes, we are about to potentially, one game away, probable, see an expansion team, a team that had to assemble itself from the cast-offs and scrap heaps of every other team in the league, make their first inaugural season's championship round in year one in a sport which, you can like it or not, no one can deny that the NHL playoffs are a battle royale. If you make the Stanley Cup and the NHL playoffs, you have earned it. And
You also have a lot of facial hair by that time.
yeah, which if you were watching on video, I'm not cutting mine until the caps are eliminated.
Is that why I did notice that, actually?
So that
He'll be Rip Van Winkle before.
I know. Shut up. They're gonna win today. Shut up, Rich. But I think it's really interesting. You talk about like legacy building, and it takes years to build a team. And here you have a major sports team do a scrap heap to potential championship in one season. That is really interesting about how you build teams and how sports leagues legislate parity.
It's also unprecedented.
Yeah, it's wild.
Well, Well, are you saying unprecedented in terms of winning in the first year or winning soon?
First year.
Oh, year one. Okay, yeah, year one. Okay.
Closest I can think of is the Jaguars made the AFC Championship game in like year 3 or something.
Yeah.
I mean, the Ravens won the Super Bowl not too long
Yeah, but
after
the Ravens aren't a real expansion team in my view.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, they brought their roster from Cleveland to Baltimore.
Yeah. Well, guys, I tell you,
Yet the Redskins go for 20 years and can't win more than 10 games.
Right, exactly.
guys, I actually watched the whole hockey game. I watched the hockey game. I will say this. I do like playoff hockey. I like the urgency of it. I like the physicality of it. I do like playoff hockey.
My dad's become a hockey fan out of nowhere. He's a huge hockey fan now.
Now, I'm not watching Winnipeg and Calgary in November, but
my dad is doing that. He's become a Nashville Predators fan, and he's been watching those. He watches those games every day. It's amazing.
Interesting you bring that up because when they first start talking expanding and then maybe this is a topic for another show, how they market hockey in warm climate cities.
Well, Nashville would be your success story. It's the most successful Southeastern team in terms of its fan base and loyalty and success on the ice.
Somebody write that down and remind us to talk about that.
All right, I'll do it after I have emotionally recovered from the inevitable Caps collapse.
Yes. I don't think I've seen you clean shaven, so hopefully that won't be for a while, Chris. Hopefully, I'm going to root for
trim,
you.
not full shear. Trim.
While I'm at my wine festival, I will be riveted to my my phone.
It's going to look like Billy Gibbons before the Caps win.
Come on. All right. So with that negativity, it's game day. Got to stay positive. We will sign off for all of our new listeners from Armchair All American. Welcome. We're excited to be on that platform, and we would love to engage with you further. We've been starting to launch the hashtag IJB to kind of one way to sort of track topics we're interested in and maybe to get what you think. So feel free to jump on that hashtag. And if you want to yell at me, you can do that at ChrisLarry33. Rich?
Disco Q, DISCOQUE5 on Twitter. Be gentle.
I'm the only one out there who does a show like this who doesn't have a Twitter. You can find me at the Hogsty, though. I'm usually manning the Hogsty platform, so at the Hogsty.
All right, so we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.